I'm Andrew Schwartz, and you're listening to The Truth of the Matter, a podcast by CSIS where we break down the top policy issues of the day and talk with the people that can help us best understand what's really going on. To get to the truth of the matter about the latest news that the Trump administration is going to dismantle USAID, we have with us my wonderful colleague, Noam Unger, who is the director of our Sustainable Development and Resilience Initiative here at CSIS. I also want to point out that Noam has served 3 presidents at AID, including President Trump during his first term in office in 2016. So you've served 3 presidents, 2 Democrat, 1 Republican at AID. And Noam, we're watching all this happen. And you also published a piece about this, but can you give us an overview of the situation and tell us what's going on here?
Yeah, absolutely, Andrew. So in the past, it's been, I guess, just over 2 weeks since the
Feels
Trump
like it's a lot longer.
Right, it does. But in the past 2 weeks, the president signed an executive order putting a pause, a freeze on all foreign assistance for 90 days for a period of review.
Right.
And it's not unusual for a new administration to come in and want to review what's happening in foreign assistance to make sure it's aligned with their policies going forward.
Right.
What was unusual was this wasn't just a pause on new obligations of money. It was a pause. What happened 4 days after the start of the administration was a stop work order, which actually froze all existing assistance. And there was mention of a waiver process, but there was a lot of confusion for how that would be executed and who to even turn to for the waivers. This was all, and it still is, really early days of this administration. That started a chain reaction of chaos in many ways.
I mean, I've never seen the acronym USAID in the news as much as we've seen it in the last week.
There's an irony to that in that so many people who have worked, toiled in this space of development and humanitarian assistance for decades have wanted their issues to be more in the news. And now I think they're like, well, I don't really like that it's in the news now. So, but there's more that's happened as well. It's not just on the money side, because the money freezes up the foreign assistance, and we can talk about that. But what also happened is there was, in one fell swoop, the career leadership at the agency was all put on administrative leave. So more than 50 leaders in Washington who lead, heads of different bureaus, whether they're functional bureaus focused on, health, or regional bureaus focused on a specific part of the world, or people helping the head of the agency interact with the rest of the Trump administration, they were all put on administrative leave. And then others were also put on administrative leave from HR and from security as the administration felt frustrated by USAID and its attempts to sort of come in and, in many ways, overturn the apple cart.
And give me a sense of the agency itself. This is one of those agencies where career people really, really matter, isn't it?
Yeah, look, well, I don't know. I mean, I think I'd say that about just about every agency of the U.S. government. Career people matter.
Yeah.
These are the experts who actually sort of, are there from across administrations. They're the institutional memory of how, not just what policies existed, but how to get things done, right? And in the case of USAID, to your point, yes, it matters a lot because there are expert, agronomists and public health experts and all types of specialties, security, logistics that are required to execute assistance in some of the toughest environments around the world and navigating a whole swath of U.S. laws and regulations. So there's a specialty associated with it. And incidentally, all of those people, the entire staff of the agency, which I think it's around 10,000 people globally, right? USAID is on the ground in 130 countries or something like that. They have all been told that they will be put on administrative leave as of Friday this week, February 7th. And then they're told that they have to actually fly back to the United States. So the entire agency
right now,
correct.
You're on a plane back as soon as you can.
Right. There was an allusion to some exceptions for people who have kids in school, which are many, or people who are pregnant. There could be all types of exceptions. But the point is, embassies around the world of the U.S. government are busy trying to sort out the implications of this as opposed to the countless other things that they're supposed to be doing on a daily basis.
Right, right. Explain For our listeners, in your view, why is USAID actually important to the United States?
USAID is a projection of US foreign policy, of US priorities around the world. The people who work at USAID and with USAID across many partner organizations, lots of non-governmental organizations, faith-based organizations, private sector organizations, to carry out programs on international education or health or democracy or economic development or humanitarian assistance around the world. It depends on the country context. Those people are carrying out a projection of American values, of what America thinks is important, and they are partnering with the people of countries around the world, not just the government. So it's distinct from diplomacy. It interlocks with diplomacy, but it is different. And they are actually executing what are often very sophisticated programs around the world with partners on the ground.
So we tend to call this soft power or smart power. Smart power is this fusion of our hard power and our soft power, our ability to avoid conflict by doing certain things in certain areas. Give me a couple examples of some of the work that AID does that you find to be particularly meaningful.
Well, I'm actually glad you mentioned smart power because, yes, look, the work of USAID certainly falls into the category of soft power. But smart power, as you said, is this fusion. And USAID and its employees are actually very often working in non-permissive environments, sometimes conflict zones, sometimes, working very closely with the US military and in conflict places where the US has very significant stakes from a security perspective. USAID people were deployed in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in so many places alongside the US military. And it's no accident that USAID, as a result, has a wall. When you walk into USAID's building, its headquarters, which is now shuttered, by the way, when
Mhm.
you walk into there, there's a wall. It's on your left as you walk sort of through the security entrance, and it has the names of USAID officials, USAID staff who lost their lives in the course of serving American interests around the world.
Yeah.
And so USAID people are putting their lives on the line all the time in the interest of the American people. And some of the work that they're doing relates to sort of water security, relates to education, relates to public health. When you think about, the Ebola virus, there was, an outbreak of the Ebola virus. The agency played a leadership role in US efforts to stem that. And that is huge.
Huge.
It's also huge for the COVID pandemic for so many other aspects. When you look at global health, and this is just one of many examples, but the agency plays a leading role in managing and has for years the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS relief, right?
PEPFAR.
PEPFAR, exactly. And the agency plays the lead role for the president's malaria initiative. And so the agency manages billions of dollars for these public health efforts. And with those billions of dollars, which we can talk about is a very small fraction of the federal budget.
Isn't it only like 1%?
Yeah, it's like essentially all, and that's all of foreign aid. All of foreign aid is less than 1/100th of the federal budget. But what I'm talking about is a fraction of that. And for that fraction, the US has saved more than 35 million lives around the world over the last 2 decades related to AIDS and malaria alone. And it does much more than that. And so when you think about the impact on families, on communities, on countries, impressions of the US and the role it plays around the world, it really has a significant factor with regard to American standing.
It punches above its weight.
Absolutely.
All right. So, the public outcry, the media outcry about this, the protests outside of USAID headquarters, which you just said is mentioned as shuttered, has been pretty extreme. I wonder if other agencies were being shut down, it would be as extreme. This feels very personal to a lot of people for some of the reasons that you just said and more.
I think it'll feel personal for lots of agencies. I think that the administration is also making changes at other agencies that I don't pay as much attention to, but
Yeah.
the FBI, the EPA, education, and I think that feels personal in lots of ways to lots of people. I think, one thing that I want to focus on, though, Andrew, is that it's not that foreign assistance isn't due for reforms. It's not that you can't make it better. It's actually continually been made better. And I've seen that
And
from the
under
inside.
continual evaluation.
Yeah, it's under continual evaluation. A lot of scrutiny from Congress at all times on U.S. foreign assistance, but it's also continually reinventing itself, making itself better, being more transparent, being more focused, shifting in priorities. But essentially, yanking the rug out from underneath this effort, or shuttering the agency, or strangling it to death, or killing it, as some in the administration are talking about. It's not an efficient or effective way to go about protecting the American people or engaging around the world.
So one of the things about this, Noam, is that AID has been a bipartisan value. We look back, PEPFAR, of course, came under the George W. Bush administration. You yourself have served in Democrat and Republican administrations. Some of your former colleagues at USAID have certainly done the same thing. There's been a lot of bipartisan support on Capitol Hill and traditionally for this agency. Why do you think that this is becoming a polarized issue now?
I don't know. I mean, I think that for a long time there have been tensions. I think that the media environment that we live in is sort of the cause of a lot of polarization, a lot of misinformation about this stuff. I mean, I think there's a way to think about America first that actually thinks about the U.S. role in the world and how, we're an invaluable player in the world and a global leader. Or there's a way to think about American first that is very isolationist. And I think that isolationist tendency, just withdrawing from the world as if we could, is a big part of the misinformation or the lack of understanding around foreign assistance. And there's also just a lack of understanding because this is work the U.S. government does outside of the U.S. So U.S. citizens are by and large not seeing it on a daily basis, right? That's another part of it. Even though sort of the contractors, the NGOs that help to execute the mission of USAID work in all states of the United States and work on behalf of the American people, it's less visible. I think that's part of it too.
So, Noam, what would the future of U.S. foreign assistance look like without USAID?
I think the U.S. needs foreign assistance and will continue to need foreign assistance. And if USAID is destroyed, something akin to it will have to be reinvented. That is a very costly endeavor.
I mean, the president clearly believes in some foreign assistance. Last night and this week, he talked about, giving another $1 billion to Israel. That's foreign assistance.
Yeah, there's lots of things that come under foreign assistance: foreign military financing, training of other militaries, peacekeeping operations. Lots of things fall into foreign assistance. The work that the U.S. is doing to support the Ukrainian military is foreign assistance, but there's a lot of other work that is about development, about humanitarian assistance, about health, and that's the work of USAID. And that is also going to have to continue in many ways. It has to continue for a number of reasons, right? I mean, if you think about engagements like what the U.S. is engaged in Ukraine, the rebuilding of Ukraine that has to happen simultaneously with, hopefully emerging from a war is about economic development. And we need experts working on that, thinking about that, and thinking about how, if it happens in a certain way, it'll benefit the United States. And if it happens in another way, it won't. But it's also about preventing, the next pandemic, right? The surveillance systems that are in place, the health systems that exist in countries around the world, we need those to be strong. Like, we're deluding ourselves if we think that infectious diseases understand political borders.
Right. And, one of the things I wonder is everybody in town, whether you're a Republican or Democrat, you're talking a lot these days about our competition with China.
Yeah.
Without USAID, is that taking a tool away from our arsenal to compete with China? Is that taking a tool away from our arsenal to lead in other ways in the world?
The U.S. has rivals around the world. The competition with those rivals is actually largely happening in developing countries around the world. We are in an active, intense geopolitical competition in which we're vying for partnerships around the world. And yes, if USAID, withers, goes away, then we are ceding that ground to our adversaries who are happy to actually engage more in those countries and say, see, the U.S. was never that reliable a partner anyway.
So an example of this is China goes into Latin America and our in our hemisphere, or they're in Africa, and
Mhm.
they're doing development projects, kind of stuff that USAID does to help these populations in these places, naturally, those governments, people of those countries, if we're not there doing that kind of work, but China is, they're going to look more favorably to China. And when it comes time to share their natural resources, for instance, something we're in deep competition for, we may lose out.
For sure. And you also mentioned that they do it the same way as us in these countries. It's not really true. They come in and they have often done it in a very sort of extractive way that actually
More transactional.
more transactional, but also puts these countries in debt in certain ways that doesn't actually help their economic development. And we've been, in many contexts, the alternative. We're sort of a sometimes a clumsy, slow partner because of the oversight and the monitoring, and we want to get things right. And we have a lot, we're a democracy. We have a lot of voices that have to shape these programs. But countries actually want US assistance because they know that it's in their long-term interest, that it's about actually helping the people of those countries and helping countries lift themselves up economically. China has a different model, right? So if we are actually ceding ground to China, it'll look very different for those country partners as well. It'll certainly look different for the US sort of competition vis-a-vis China. And China imposes certain restrictions or certain emphases that cause countries to then vote differently in places like the UN, and it's not just China. I will say, in parts of Africa, Russia is not just willing to move in and engage in, activities to support different communities and actors. It already has. If you look at the Sahel, Russia has moved in.
So, no, we could probably take this a step further and say, I want to ask you, how could closing foreign outposts that are set up by USAID open the United States up to potential national security risks?
Well, look, I think closing foreign outposts means there's multiple ways actually, right? One is what we were talking about, right? If programs that are focused on transnational threats like global health are shuttered, even for a little while, if they're shuttered, it actually has ripple effects that have a long tail on the health systems of those countries. And we could actually have certain infectious diseases spread across borders in less controlled ways that threaten American business interests, economic interests around the world, and American people here at home. But there are other ways, right? These programs are often engaging in efforts that are ultimately intended to help people stay in their communities rather than engage in dangerous emigration from those communities. And that affects, regional stability in the areas where those people are displaced. And it also is affecting things that are much closer to US borders as well, in terms of people trying to come into the US. There are other things like transnational drug and crime regimes.
Something this administration is very concerned with.
Sure, and all
All
administrations should
administrations
be
are.
concerned about,
Yeah.
right? But those concerns are often mitigated by efforts that are executed by an agency like USAID that goes in and helps, create the incentives for farmers to produce productive agricultural products that are helpful to the global community as opposed to drugs.
All right. So we could talk about this forever, but to get to the bottom of it is going to take quite some time. What message in the short term, though, does it send to foreign states, both our allies and our adversaries, that this is how the new way of doing business in the United States?
Well, look, we're in a moment where there's this state of confusion. There are a lot of different pronouncements. There are different things happening every day, sometimes every hour. But even in that sort of swirl of things, you had Putin's advisor, who was the former president, Medvedev, publicly talking about how this would help Russia and hurt the US, right? I mean, this is not a secret. Our American rivals are basically laughing at this sort of, self-destruction of one of the greatest tools in the toolkit of US foreign policy.
And again, as you point out, one that in the larger scheme of things doesn't cost us very much.
No, look, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't. It's 1/100th of the federal budget. We get a lot more value and we protect ourselves much more by spending this assistance around the world. Are there ways that it could be spent better or ways that you could sort of focus it from one country to another? Yes. Do you have to turn it off and recall all the staff in order to make those changes? No.
It's hard to know whether this is going to be temporary or permanent, or it's going to take some other form. What are you hearing about that? Is some of this just simply going to be folded into the State Department and we'll still be able to do the same things? It just won't be called USAID?
And it might even be called USAID. The State Department recently shut down the USAID website and created a part of the State Department website called USAID. The intent seems to be clear. Secretary of State Marco Rubio did finally send some official notice to Congress saying that there would be a review, and has seemed to intimate that these things will be moving much more closely under the Secretary of State, who incidentally has always had the authority, and the head of USAID has always reported to the Secretary of State.
And I believe this particular Secretary of State, like many others, has been supportive of the U.S. foreign assistance programs and of USAID in general.
Absolutely. When he was Senator Rubio, the Secretary of State made some excellent statements on the value of foreign assistance. I think now that things are in turmoil, there are real questions, to your point about how temporary or long-term these changes are. It's clearly moving under the State Department in a pretty drastic way. Members of Congress will have a lot of thoughts, already do, on that, because they appropriate the dollars for this and any agency of the U.S. government. And they also have the prerogative to be involved in decisions about whether agencies are wholesale shut down or stood up, for that matter.
Noam, as you pointed out, this is all under review right now. What are some of the things that you feel could actually be effectively reformed?
Well, look, there have been, every administration tries to reform foreign aid in some respect with regard to its priorities. And there have been really good examples over past administrations. As we've talked about, I served in the State Department and USAID during Bush 43. I served at USAID during the Obama administration, and I served at USAID during the first 18 months of the last Trump administration. And each one of those administrations engaged in reforms. The Bush administration stood up the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief.
Yeah.
A huge effort that really not just changed the lives of many people around the world, especially across Africa, but also changed the way that foreign assistance is conducted, really upped the game for foreign assistance.
Yeah, and I should point out that some of the ideas around that came out of a task force that CSIS put together, bipartisan task force, with John Kerry and Bill Frist, who were then senators, leading it.
And the bipartisanship is really important. And that effort, was directed out of the State Department, has been, and was often managed and executed out of USAID. It's been actually a very productive partnership. And so that's important to look at, especially at this time when there are questions around the connections between USAID and the rest of the State Department. The Bush administration also created the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which is a way of investing in promising partner countries in a bigger way, often with big infrastructure that the country identifies as a key constraint to their economic growth. But it's also an investment-oriented thing. It's really partnering with a country on investments. And then during the Trump administration, the Trump administration stood up the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, which was created out of essentially the OPIC.
We got so many acronyms.
The Overseas Private Investment Corporation.
Yes.
And so, but these are investment-oriented tools of U.S. foreign assistance, and that is and needs to be part of the future of foreign assistance. It doesn't mean we're going to always move entirely away from all grant-related assistance or certain other types of humanitarian and health programming, but there are ways that these tools can work in concert together much more effectively, and that's something that I think this administration and any administration would be wise to look at, right? I also think that under the Trump administration, the last one, they reorganized parts of USAID. There were things that didn't make that much sense. You had our food assistance in humanitarian crises was separated from the rest of our humanitarian assistance for those same crises, and they pulled that together. There are common sense ways that we can continually improve our foreign assistance, and we have, and we should continue to do that.
Noam, I can't thank you enough for coming on today to help us understand this issue better. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, check out our larger suite of CSIS podcasts. From Into Africa, The Asia Chessboard, China Power, AIDS 2020, The Trade Guys, Smart Women, Smart Power, and more. You can listen to them all on major streaming platforms like iTunes and Spotify. Visit csis.org/podcasts to see our full catalog.